Hello and welcome to Frank's School. Waterlove, my fourth shot at this. This is the 175th day. I'm coming up to the end of the fourth year. Well, books. I showed you glimpses of these books. They can wait a day, I think. I need to say something else. And one other thing to get out of the way is, yes, Vitruvius was the Roman author that I found and read some about. And if you look him up, if you would Google him, you'd begin a quest to find that stuff out. Now, what I felt that I really need to say, in a way, it's so obvious to me that I forget to say it. Forget that it's probably not at all obvious to most people, and it's the presence of the connection of fossil fuels and water. How much oil is there in the water? How much coal is there in the water? How much nuclear power is there in their water? It's funny to think about it like that, but because it sounds like it's actually mixed in with the water. It's in the delivery of the water. There is, in the modern world, there is so much fossil fuel involved in the delivery of water. This house, for example, if I turn the faucet on or flush the toilet, an electric pump over there has pumped that water up out of a well, and the power, the electricity, has come from a coal-fired power station 30 miles away, probably, or wherever. In other words, it took a lot of coal to deliver that water to the toilet or to the sink. I see that all the time. And the houses that are built all around here, that people love to build their houses high up on these hills around here. Well, that means that their water supply is going to require a lot of fossil fuels to deliver the water that they consume. CACs, kilocalories as currency. This is something you maybe don't want to dive into right now because this is a bit of a heavy subject, very heavy subject, but it's in Frank's School. If you would look at the Decentralist Manifesto, Wedge's Paradigm, DACT and Enacting, Decentralist Action and Inaction, Acting, always there is my awareness of the consumption of or degradation of energy involved in the modern economy and a modern lifestyle. Well, it's there with water, and it was there in a sense even before I developed my Waterlove. So pumping. In some older languages, I think there isn't even a word for pump. Pump was a sort of a new word. Now, water, if it's lifted, it can be lifted by the wind power. And I don't really have too much against that. Or drainage. And that was something else that I should have maybe stressed a little bit more. Irrigation and drainage are really one and the same thing. If you deliver water, you have to think about where's that water going to go. And I don't have the time or the knowledge really to go into a whole teaching about this, but the residue of salts and minerals, if it's just evaporates. It's a matter that's I'm not going to cover it here. But anyway, I had to eventually make it clear that when I talked about irrigation, my love was for gravity irrigation, water falling by gravity, not being pumped and sprayed. That's quite another matter. Now, in the Alps and in Sweden, I remember my parents, I said, when you travel to Sweden, look, please, to see if they irrigate. And they came back and said, yes, they irrigate everywhere, but it's sprayed. Well, if there's mountains in Switzerland, for example, that doesn't really have to be pumped. There's enough of a fall that all you have to do is contain that water pressure in pipes, and it will spray. I don't think there's any pumping involved in so much of the irrigation in Le Valais, for example, where the Bisses are. But for the most part, I'm talking about gravity irrigation, and that eliminates so much that you would think of. Let me jump down to here. So a spring where water naturally comes out of the ground is quite different from a well where the water's down there and the water has to be lifted somehow. And a fountain, of course, enjoys sometimes simply the fall, but often the spray of water under pressure. Back to Vitruvius. I mean, he dealt with this. I have my compadre Tilo here. This was compadre is like a blood brother, and I became a compadre with Tito in Brazil when I was living there. And he was a peasant. He lived poor, and he lived on the mountainside. And every morning, the first thing he would do after he got up would be go down to a spring spring, and with a yoke and two buckets, and he would carry. I think he would make two trips back. Is maybe 300 yards back to his hut or his house, his little house, and those 4 buckets of water were his wife's water supply for the kitchen for that day. And then at the end of his workday, he'd go down. People would go down to the fountain to wash themselves off as well. But that was her water supply. He was carrying it, delivering that water there, lifting it and carrying it there. And if you go back to this kilocalories as currency, you might think, oh, that's a lot of work. Well, it's not very many kilocalories. Not human work labor like that. So I think of him now and then, and I so often think of him when I watch people, especially people from the city. If they come here and they're going to wash the dishes, they don't turn the water on and let the water run, and they wash the dishes. I wash dishes like a Brazilian peasant. I mean, as if I had to carry the water that I'm using. All right, well. So I'm jumping around here a little bit, I guess, with what I have here, but I wanted to mention Tito. And then canals, I'm going backwards here. Canals, the canal system, in terms of tax, was and is much, much more efficient than the train system, which replaced it. And then even way more so than the trucking system that came after that. Canals were a very a fine way to move large amounts if you're going to move large amounts of material long distances. Canals, of course, the building of the canals is quite another matter. When people say canals here in the United States, they think, oh yeah, the Suez Canal, the Panama Canal, but there were canals all over the place. In the United States, not so much so, but yes, here in the United States as well. People just have forgotten it because they were replaced by the train system. Also in Europe, they're still there. They're still being used a good bit, canals. But, and an interesting subject to me. And it has to do with the whole gravity business of not pumping water. And then finally, my approach to villages and cities. Ever since I sort of sorted this out, I think, when I come across a village or a city, I almost automatically think, well, where is its water supply? New York City's water supply is, I want to say, hundreds of miles away. It's maybe not hundreds, but almost that, in the mountains in lower New York State. 3, I think, and they're building a 4th, massive tunnels under the city that deliver that water by gravity. Now, how they get it to the top of the skyscrapers, I'm just not so sure. That's New York City. But then 3 months ago, the Hawklings and I were in Portugal visiting abandoned aldeias do Xisto, these abandoned villages out of stone. And even these little abandoned villages, you could find their water supply. And I sort of just automatically do that. And if you'd ever go back and look into these videos that I've put online of my travels, you would see that. All right, well, this was something that I really felt I needed to discuss because it absolutely affects the way I look at water and why I do things, and there's so much that I do that people just do not understand why I do it the way I do. Well, you know, if you ignore this, that through my eyes I am always seeing the use of gasoline, oil, coal, electricity, nuclear. I'm seeing that and how it's being used all the time. That might at least give you a hint of why I look at things so differently. Well, I think next time I'm going into the books. Bye for now.